the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee.
Shalom, dear friends. We now come to the final plague which leads to the death of the firstborn, that extends to all Egyptian male offspring of humans, beasts, and crops, and that forms the content of chapter 11. Actually, in this section, we only have the announcement of the final or the 10th plague, which is the death of the firstborn in Egypt. The actual event is recorded only after a long description of the celebration of the Passover. This is presented as the conclusion to the series of plagues and the beginning of the Passover celebration. So, right from the beginning, we find a connection between the Exodus event and the Passover celebration. Earlier in the story, in the beginning of Exodus, it was the Israelites who cried from their suffering. Now, it is the turn of the Egyptians to cry. There will be no sign of hostility against the Israelites. We look at chapter 11:7. Not a dog shall growl at any of the Israelites, not at people, not at animals, so that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. This takes place at midnight, and this has an important resonance to things that are going to take place. The death of all male children, including that of the royal household, who is the representative of the sun god, manifest the failure of Egyptian pantheon. The gods of Egypt and the powers of nature that they worshipped are not really gods. It is not the sun god, but Yahweh God is the Lord of life and death. God had already warned this in chapter 4:23. And I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will slay your firstborn son. Friends, all the evil forces, whether social structures or institutions that enchain individuals and communities, will be gradually destroyed by the power of God. No powerful evil structure can permanently stand against the mighty liberating hand of Yahweh God. Even though most of the so called plagues or miracles can be explained by employing scientific or natural means, the message that they convey is always relevant, always relevant, even in our contemporary times. God acts when human beings oppress other human beings. God acts when human beings destroy the environment, when human beings attempt to break the balance of the universe that God set up, the balance that was created in chapter 1 and 2 of Genesis is constantly threatened by the arrogance and the selfishness of human beings. And now the warning is given to us through earthquakes or tsunami or other threatening changes to the ecosystem that we face very often. The change of the climatic conditions, the severe situations of drought, it is a clarion call to go back to the origins. Go back to the call of God at the creation to be stewards of God's creation. The real liberation leads people to the real worship of God, and genuine worship leads to liberation and salvation. So, chapter 12, which is the theme for our um, study today, describes how the powerful hand of God is extended to the Israelites to redeem them, to free them from the clutches of the tyranny of Pharaoh. Now, before the uh, occurrence of the climatic plague of deliverance from Egypt, the narrator introduces the two important feasts of the Passover and the unleavened bread. The two very, very important feasts. Actually, the three originally separate events of the feast of the Passover, the feast of the unleavened bread, and the redemption of the firstborn were all connected to events of the Exodus. We shall now quickly look at the origin of these two important feasts that have influenced the life of the people of Israel up to the present times. First, the origin of the and the meaning of the feast of the Passover and unleavened bread. Exodus chapter 12, Deuteronomy chapter 16, Leviticus chapter 23. Also, in the book of Numbers chapter 28, Ezekiel chapter 45, they all deal with the these two feasts together, the feast of the Passover and the unleavened bread. The feast of the Passover, the word Passover comes from the root Pasach or Pesach, which could literally mean to limp or to jump. Yahweh jumped over. He left behind the houses of the Israelites. Interestingly, if you look at the etymology in the Egyptian language, it can mean to blow or to strike, and it is very significant. Striking of the firstborn of Egyptians and passing over the houses of Israel to liberate them. Originally, the Passover was a rite practiced by shepherds during the springtime. So, this was a pre Jewish feast. It's a feast of the shepherds, feast of the nomads, celebrated sometimes in the wilderness. There was no priest, no altar, and this was a feast celebrated during the winter season when the shepherds would pitch their tents close to the desert areas. But by the springtime, they would set off towards the agricultural lands, and the lands would be free after harvesting, and there would be enough fodder for the sheep. All the members of the family would come together and kill a goat which is 1 year old and sprinkle the blood on the tent poles. The purpose of putting blood on the doorpost, originally the tent poles, um, has two functions. First, to secure fecundity and prosperity for the flocks. Remember, the number of sheep and cattle, important for the prosperity of the people. Second, to ward off certain pestilence believed to be caused by some demonic power. Imagine if there is epidemic that will affect the entire herd, all would be gone. So these reasons, purposes are also narrated in the biblical text. During this feast, the victim was roasted over a fire without any kitchen utensils. It was eaten with unleavened bread, which is interestingly still the normal bread of the Bedouins today, the nomadic people in Israel even today. So, eaten with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. And what are these bitter herbs? Some desert plants used for seasoning food. The ritual prescribed that those eating should have their belts already fastened, sandals on their feet, and a shepherd's staff in one hand. Since it was kept at night time and in the desert, it would be observed at the full moon. It would be celebrated on a full moon after the March equinox, when the sun is exactly above the equator, which makes day and night of equal length. Later, the priestly order, the priestly tradition fixed the feast on a permanent basis on the 14th day of the first month, that is, at the full moon. So, this must have been the date of the Passover from the very beginning, on the full moon of the first month. Now, why it was called Passover? Because for them it was a passing over from a trouble filled winter time to a joyful summer, passing over. A movement from desert to the fertile land. So it has got different meanings. However, during the Exodus event, it acquired a new dimension and a new meaning, that there is a movement, a passing over from slavery to freedom, from the Egyptian captivity to the freedom into the promised land. Instead of sprinkling blood on the 10 poles, the blood of the lamb will be sprinkled on the lintels of the house. So, if the original nomadic people, they would sprinkle the blood on the 10 poles, now in the family, the blood will be sprinkled on the lintels of the house. The bitter herbs are used to roast the lamb, olden times, to add taste, to season the food. But in the Exodus event, it's a memorial of the bitter experiences in Egypt. So, this feast of the Passover continued to be a family celebration until the religious reform of King Josiah, as attested by Numbers chapter 9, verses 1 to 4. Also, Joshua chapter 5, 10 to 11. So the account in Numbers and Joshua tell us the Passover was basically a family celebration. However, the celebration of Passover took a different tone during the Reformation set up by King Josiah by the end of 7th century BC. The details of this move is displayed in 2 Kings chapter 23 and 2 Chronicles. King Josiah centralized the feast, and it became a temple feast instead of a family feast. Later, this feast has to be celebrated only in the temple of Jerusalem. And when this shift took place, sacrifice was done not by the head of the family, but by the Levitical priest. The blood is not smeared on the lintels, but poured under the altar in the temple. Thus, Josiah brought together all the liturgical celebrations under the purview, under the jurisdiction of the Jerusalem temple. So there was a high centralization of the liturgical celebration. So this was so we see a movement from a family celebration to a temple feast, thus making it a major pilgrim feast of great solemnity. Later, this will turn out to be the most important pilgrim feast for the people of Israel. Originally, it was celebrated in the month of Abib, attested by Exodus chapter 13:4, chapter 23:15, chapter 34:15. So, this is to be celebrated in the month of Abib, which is the first month of the year. Now, Abib means wheat sheaf. This was the name given to the month by the Canaanites. So Abib is the first month of the Canaanite. However, the Jews accepted the Babylonian names of the month after their association with the Babylonians after the exile. That's the reason why we find two names for the same month: Abib, Canaanite name, and Nisan, Babylonian name. When you look at the book of Esther, chapter 3, verse 7, we come across the name Nisan, which later would be the more common name for this feast. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, this is from the book of Esther, the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that means they cast lots before Haman and so on, which is the month of Adar. So this reference to the month of Nisan is attested in the book of Esther, and that will be the name later on taken up by the Jewish people. Coming back to this feast, each family is to select 1-year-old lamb or goat. The lamb shall be without blemish. Now, interestingly, they are instructed to keep the lamb ready already on the 10th of the month. On the 14th evening, they have to kill the lamb. So there will not be any problem of looking for it on the last moment. And they shall eat its flesh that night, roasted with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. The unleavened bread is the ordinary bread eaten by the shepherds, and bitter herbs are the desert plants used by the shepherds for spices. They were the spice available for them in the desert, and they should burn the non consumable parts before morning. They should eat the meal with their loins girded, sandals on feet, staff in hand, and in haste. Similarly, clothing and attire suit the background. Preparation for a hurried journey. And this preparation for this hurried journey is valid only for the first Passover. And later on, this celebration would take several hours. And at the time of Jesus, lot of psalms and blessings were integrated into the celebration. The blood rite in chapter 12 of Exodus establishes the link between the 10th plague of killing the firstborn of Egyptians and the Passover. Yahweh will go through the land of Egypt, striking down the firstborn. For I will pass through the land of Egypt, because it is the Passover of the Lord. I will strike down every firstborn. When he sees the blood on the houses, the destroyer will not be permitted to strike. Yahweh will pass over the houses of the Israelites. He will spare, protect, and deliver. Shall I suggest a rereading of this blood rite? Blood rite is apotropaic in purpose. The smearing of the blood on the tent poles is intended to ward off all danger to the members of the tribe, and especially to the young about to be born. The danger is personified by the word, the destroyer, in verse 23. Yeah. The blood prevents the destroyer from striking the humans and the animals of the Israelites. This was later on a 7-day celebration that began on the 15th of the month, which means 14th evening. 14th evening to 21st evening. Chapter 12, verse 18. Actually, the celebration is celebrated on the 14th of the month. So, evening is actually the following day. And the second feast is the feast of the unleavened bread. The feast is called Matzot in Hebrew, which means unleavened or unfermented bread. It is actually a right of the farmers, a kind of spring cleaning of the previous year's old leaven. The old leaven represents the past, and this feast is the feast of a new beginning. The feast of the Matzot, or the feast of the unleavened bread, marked the beginning of the barley harvest. When the first crop is to be gathered, there is a celebration of harvesting season that will last for 7 weeks. And the harvest was counted from the moment when the sickle began to cut the grain. Deuteronomy chapter 16:9. For the first 7 days of the barley harvest, the only bread made with the new grain was eaten without leaven. It represents totally a new beginning. The leaven represents the past. So, the second feast, which is the feast of the unleavened bread, means without leaven, um, would symbolize um, two, um, symbolize something of thanksgiving for the harvest, apart from the grain from the previous year. That's why it's a symbol of a new beginning. Another characteristic of this feast was that an offering of the first fruits was made. Leviticus chapter 23, 9 to 14. But the real feast to celebrate the first fruit of the harvest was the Feast of the Weeks, which marked a preparation for the second feast. So, the day when the sickle was used to cut the first grain was the beginning of the feast. And the conclusion was the second feast called the Pentecost in Greek, Pentecost, which we call the 50th day. And these two together marked the beginning and at the end of the harvest time. So, 7 weeks from the starting of the feast, 7 into 7, 49. 50th day was the conclusion of the feast. They eat the unleavened bread for 7 days. The rituals that are part of this, and on the first day, all leaven must be removed from the house. Those who ate anything leavened should be cut off or removed from the community. They should hold a holy assembly on the first and the last day of the feast. They should not do any work on those days of celebration. They should cook only the food that they should eat on those days. Nothing should go waste. This is the rule laid down in Leviticus chapter 23, 5 to 8. This must have taken place after the reform of Josiah, which I mentioned a couple of minutes earlier. This Josiah's reform is also mentioned in Ezekiel chapter 45, 21, which took place, reform that took place before the exile. What is its connection with the history of salvation? All the traditions of the Pentateuch, all the traditions of the Pentateuch connect the feast of the unleavened bread, Exodus 23, 34, Deuteronomy 16, or the Passover, Deuteronomy 16, 1 to 6, or both the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread, Exodus chapter 12, 23 to 27, chapter 12, 21, chapter 13, 17, which is coming from the priestly writer. So both the J writer and the P writer connect the feast of the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread with the Exodus from Egypt. The text which connects them most closely is Exodus chapter 12, in which the rites for both feasts of a Passover and unleavened bread are incorporated into the story of the Exodus. So in chapter 12, 21 to 28, there are Passover instructions given, and they vary from verses 1 to 20. For example, verse 21 says, verse 21 does not specify any particular animal. For example, it says, then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, go, select lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover lamb. Instead, in 12:5, your lamb shall be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. So there are some differences. So in chapter 12, verse 5 specifies goat with no physical defects. So we continue with the instructions for the future, because for the Israelites, these two feasts connected with the Exodus are to preserve the observance for all future generation. They have to explain to every young generation the meaning of the Passover celebration, because they are so much ingrained in the psyche of the people of Israel. Generation after generation should keep alive the memory of the greatest event in which God intervened in the life of Israel. Friends, shalom, and God be with you till the next episode, where we are going to explain more of this Exodus event. God be with you.
Thank you, Lord, for the gift and love of your sacred word. Open our hearts to put into practice that which you have revealed to us through your word. Amen.